she has to do it. Think it, you just do it.
Yeah, he'll make it. It's true. Oh,
Well, you've been doing some nice things. I mean, I've seen a
Yeah.
couple of things you've done.
the Pelican mailbox.
Well, the mailbox thing, she posted it on.
Yeah. Oh, boy.
I wouldn't call that.
It's American folk art.
It is.
Never mind. Taking 70 years.
That's all right. Serious. As long as we get.
Yeah. I'm sure they like it. Well, good evening.
Oh boy. So we have issues with Facebook and now with the microphone. Hello everyone. Good evening. Welcome. Good to be with you. For those that are joining live on YouTube or Facebook, I am unable to post the donation button, but I think you can still go to the Unity website and donate for the service if that's something you're looking to do. So unfortunately, it's not happening. So on with the show. Okay, so we're going to be getting back into a little bit of where we were last week with this idea of the holographic reality and how we are experiencing these two levels of creation. One is this hidden dimension where we are within the realm of spirit, and the outer dimension is where we are experiencing ourselves as the body-brain identity, right? This physical form. And we looked last week into Zen Buddhism and Taoism as great models that were expressing this implicate-explicate order of the universe last week. That we saw how, which was fascinating, the Taoist experience or revelation, if you will, is that every living entity is a point in consciousness that exists within this hidden dimension of spirit, and through its intentionality and willingness, it creates through what the Taoists will call qi, the Hindus will call prana, and Jesus in A Course in Miracles will call psychic energy. And in the Course, Jesus says that when we are creating in alignment with our truth, we are co-creating with God. And it's this infinite extension of love and joy and pure being. And when we have distorted our creative ability and we identify as a limited individual, we still have this creative function in our mind. We are eternally creative. But when we misidentify with form, we will, as Jesus says in the Course, miscreate. And so we will use our psychic energy to actually distort what we're experiencing. And that is the root of all suffering. And so this identity center that the Course will call the ego is really the root of all of our suffering, because it's who we think we are, and then we are miscreating from this false belief of identity. And remember what the Taoists and the Chan or Zen Buddhists are saying, and as Jesus says in the Course, is that we're doing this every instant. What the Taoists say is our true being is this origin moment that is always now. And so we are originating or projecting our now as this. And what makes it appear as if it's not this immediacy of now that we're doing it is we have these residual effects of our past, these impressions, these beliefs, these habit patterns, memories, that make us feel like we are carrying forward a past that is and was and now somehow exists here, and then we're just kind of robotically following along with this past trajectory. And so John just keeps showing up as John always shows up. And John's going to think what John always thinks. Maybe he'll have some new ideas, but he'll always be the separated John. And so this is where we want to recognize that the individual is where we have to turn our attention in order to break out of the prison, right? Free yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our mind. This is where we free ourselves from mental slavery. We have been enslaved to this independently existing entity called me. And so what meditation allows us to do is get into a very concentrated state of turning our full focus or attention onto the witness. Because when we become discreetly aware of the nature of the witness, we realize that the self-image, this independently existing me, with my story from the past, is an object. When I become very much identified as the witness, I'm watching me. I'm not the me. I'm not my problems. I'm not my shortcomings. I'm not the guilt that the me feels. All of these things that are wrapped up within limitation, lack, deprivation are all part of a construct that, yes, I've believed in and I've used to distort my reality and to distort the reality of all y'all. Because don't think it's, you get away with it for just doing it to yourself. As Jesus says in A Course in Miracles, when I'm healed, I'm not healed alone. And when I choose to imprison myself, I don't imprison myself alone. I'm imprisoning all of you to the extent that you're vulnerable to be imprisoned. So if you don't know who you are and you don't realize you're this origin moment being that is weaving chi or prana or psychic energy from what you will, and you're free in your intention, and your will has joined with the will of your creator, if you don't know that about yourself, you're subject to my distortions, as I'm subject to your distortions. And so we can actually reinforce the dream, we can reinforce negativity and suffering, we can key in on certain parts of our stories together and make sure that we insist that we're these localized, temporary beings that are born to die. And that's what we normally do, yes? And even when we talk spiritual, we have to recognize that it's often coming from this unexamined belief that I am the solid me, with my story. This is what St. Paul called the mind of the flesh. The mind of the flesh doesn't know God, doesn't want to know God, is at enmity with God, or wholeness, or reality, whatever way you want to put God into your thought system. This mind of the flesh just wants to be its own ruler, its own boss, its own authority. It wants to write its own story. And so when we are the mind of the flesh, we don't know God and we suffer. And we are at the slings and arrow level of impacting one another and reinforcing the limitations of our life together. And we might get with people and say, well, isn't this a terrible, mixed up, crazy world? Look at what's going on in the world. Isn't this horrible? And so it might not focus on me or you, it might focus on what others are doing, or just the general tone of where the world is going. Don't be fooled, even when it seems to be across the country or around the world, if you're seeing the limitations, lack, deprivation, hatred, and war. You're seeing it in the hologram of your own consciousness. And therefore, that's your reality. You're never separate from what you're seeing. You're generating it. So this is the beauty of these teachings. We've referred to them before as a higher psychology. They give you the tools, which are all mental or consciousness-based tools, to turn your attention on breaking yourself out of this invisible prison. Right? So remember what we said then. when we are existing as this solid me, we are under a heavy influence of our past and our subconscious programming. And this is why we also said that churches and governments and all types of influences want to get us when we're young, so that we can get programmed into believing a certain way. And so we have these impressions and indoctrinations that actually have become second nature now. We don't bother to examine them. And so we just live reacting to them as if they're real. And they run our life. Your worldview runs your life. And so this is what's beautiful about being in an apocalyptic season within human history. Apocalypsis in Greek means the unveiling. Everything is going to be revealed, right? That's the last book in the New Testament. The apocalypsis of Jesus Christus, the apocalypse or the revelation of Jesus Christ. This is when the Christ reveals itself. And what does that mean? It means everything that's false is going to be seen, judged, and let go. Now, where is this going to happen? In your consciousness. You're going to go through your apocalypse. And we are collectively, I think, rapidly moving towards it. We can see all of the efforts of this one world beast system that wants to surveil and control and completely dominate through tyranny, right? Legislation of tyranny. So all of this has got to be revealed in order for it to come down. So in the midst of the turmoil, the terror, the uncertainty, the frustration, you actually get to heat up your system so that you can birth the Christ in you. This ability to see through the false appearance and reveal who you really are. The revelation can't come, just like a child can't come without the birth pangs. So we're going to go through these convulsions, and as we keep saying, the way that we navigate them most successfully is we establish our consciousness upon the rock of reality. We get quiet. We relax. We open to presence. And we let go of all of these false assumptions and all of the old programming and conditioning that we received growing up until this moment. And we see this moment as completely unconditioned, completely new and fresh. Limitless possibilities are here and now. Heaven is here. There is nowhere else. Heaven is now. There is no other time. That's a direct quote from A Course in Miracles. And so we clear the mirror of our mind of all we think, so that the light that is God can be revealed in our awareness. This is what the Christians would call regeneration. Regeneration is this new birth where you go from being the mind of the flesh to the mind of the spirit. You shift reality. In what we're going to look at today in the Tantra system of India, this is called Shaktipata. Shaktipata means the descent of grace. That's what starts the whole transformation in consciousness according to the tantric teachers in the East. And this is exactly what you see in the Acts of the Apostles. So the Jesus movement really kicked in on the day of Pentecost. When the disciples and the apostles were in the upper room, they're together as one in prayer, and then this mighty wind blows through, and the Holy Spirit comes, as Jesus had promised, and sets upon the crowns of their head like a flame of fire, right? Tongues of fire. And this was the descent of grace. This was the regeneration or the ignition into the mind of the Spirit. And this is what starts the whole process. Until you have that descent of grace, this is all going to be theory, interesting concepts maybe completely ridiculous and impossible. But until you have that experience, this will all seem so out there, impossible, not really something that applies to you. But the rebirth is what happens when you actually experience it. So regeneration, according to the Christian teachings, gets you on the path, shifts you from the flesh to the spirit in consciousness. You no longer have the material sense governing your life. Your eyes, your ears, your nose, these are not showing your reality. As St. Paul says, we don't walk by sight. We don't live our life according to the physical senses. We walk by this faith of knowing our true self. So this inner wisdom begins to dawn, and you realize you are not in this world. Or rather, I should say, you are not of this world. You are in it, but not of it. And so that's what this regeneration gives you, this shift in consciousness. You get translated, he says in the epistle to Colossians, you get translated out of the darkness of the physical laws and into the kingdom of the Son of the Beloved. You go into a completely different realm of consciousness and perception. This is, again, being said throughout all of these other sacred traditions. That's why we have these cross-cultural corroborations of evidence. This is why we call it a greater psychology. This has all been mapped. The only thing missing is your walking the path. You accepting the invitation. You undergoing that descent of grace. And as soon as you do, you want to meditate. You want to study. So if you have these desires and appetites to study sacred texts, to show up at a service like this, to meditate, to pray, to go to sacred sites, these are all outward indicators that the descent of grace has occurred in your consciousness. You wouldn't have those appetites unless you had the ignition already. So rest at ease, my friends. If you're within earshot of this, you've been called. And on some level, you've answered the call. Second step in that process of awakening, according to the Christian tradition, is what they refer to as sanctification. Sanctification is the purification of your consciousness. It's the ability to actually live the life of the Spirit, to walk your talk, right? To actually do this deep dive on what you think, go through the sorting out process, the house cleaning, dig into the basement, and get rid of everything that doesn't serve God's purpose in your life. You clear out. Again, St. Paul beautifully says, let's see, how does he say this? For you are a new creation. Old things have passed away. Behold, everything has become new. So in other words, then, you realize that you've shifted from body-mind to spirit identity. Then you actually want to clean out whatever is not in accord with your true self, which is the Christ or higher self. And then as a result of this, you become increasingly more sensitive to reality. This is what in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, I wanted to go through the sutras as well a little bit because he maps this so beautifully in his ethics. So Patanjali is saying that when you begin to attune to reality, you will naturally practice nonviolence, ahimsa. You're not going to harm anything. Because when you have this descent of grace and you awaken to your deeper nature, you realize there's only one nature. There's only one self. So to harm another is to harm yourself. So this is ahimsa. You're not going to be violent in your thinking, so I will give up all attack thoughts. You will not be violent in your speech, and you will not be violent in your actions to the best of your ability. The next ethical principle is satya, truth. And Sat in Sanskrit means that you're in harmony with reality. Sat is being. And so Satya is in thought, speech, and action. You're going to harmonize to this implicate order. The Tao, the Buddha nature, the Christ mind, the deep structure of creation that is patterning everything. The Logos. You're going to pattern to the pattern. You're going to meld into this deeper circuitry of the divine mind. And they've done studies, I think his name is Franco Varela, did studies at Stanford Research Institute in 2020, where they were mapping and seeing the correlation between the neuronal network of your brain and the metagalactic order of the outer cosmos. In other words, galaxies are akin to neurons. And so there's like this mirroring effect of as above, so below, as within, so without. In other words, there's no separation between the deep pattern of the macrocosm and the inner pattern of your psyche or microcosm. So that when you go into meditation and you get rid of, melt away all these limiting beliefs of you are the body, you are separate, you are your story, you're this solid me, you naturally will come back into this fluid, harmonious, interpenetrating, multidimensional experience of your being. And that's joy. Right? So the third ethical principle would be you're not going to steal asteya in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, but that means you're not going to want to get anything from anyone. Why is that? Because the fourth principle is you're content. You have everything now. You've gotten rid of the poverty thinking of being a false self that needs, that's solid and isolated and deprived and lacking. You've allowed that to go. You shifted from that to the spirit. You've been translated out of that darkness. You've accepted the descent of grace. You've been born again. As Jesus actually says in the Greek, well, he didn't say it in the Greek, but it was written in John's Gospel, you must be born from above. You must have this higher birth. You must see your life from the implicate order. Once you do this, you'll realize you're projecting your universe. There's nothing you're not. When you're seeing it with level confusion down here as the separated self, everything else is out there. All the truth, all the value, all the abundance, all the love, it's out there. There's nothing in here. I'm horribly lacking. And that creates anxiety and insecurity, and I got to go get. And I have these drives, these appetites, not to study and pray and meditate. I have these lower passions, these appetites to go outside of myself and possess and control and manipulate and take so that my little me can be happy. My idol can get what it's craving. And Buddha said that is the root of all suffering, right? Tanha, craving, grasping onto the solid me. So when you meditate and you have that descent of grace operating in your consciousness, you're relaxing your grip. Try that as we're going along. Relax your grip on what you think, what you're feeling in your body, the definitions you've given to yourself, the limitations that you believe in. This idea of linear time. Relax it all. Let it go. Let it flow out of you. Because guaranteed, if you do this with any bit of intentionality, you will come to the golden moment, the origin moment, where in some way, not through your physical senses will you know it, but through your spiritual vision, you will sense this discrete, hidden reality at the core of your being, the spiritual eye, Christ vision, the eye of the heart. This is where the dreamer abides. And once you begin to get back in touch with the dreamer, you can then change your dream. We can change the dream. But we have to let go of the belief that it can't be changed, right? Isn't that one of those things that grips our consciousness? This is just the way it is. And we've accepted it. We've rolled over, like what we talked about a couple of weeks ago, this learned helplessness. We've been hurt so many times that we don't think there's any possibility that we can change the way life is. And it's only because we thought life was occurring out there and coming at us. But once you come to the place within the heart, as it says in Solomon's Proverbs, where all of life issues forth, so guard your heart carefully. From within the heart flow the issues of life. The prana, the chi, the psychic energy is flowing from your heart. And it's making the hologram that you're experiencing. You are making that hologram. How marvelous. And how tragic if we don't know we're doing it. That's why Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, you will be controlled by the outer forces and you will call it fate. You don't realize it's your own unconscious. Then when you take it back by letting go of the beliefs, again, I think this is one of the major blocks for us. This belief that it can't be changed. In A Course in Miracles, he says that this world seems to be like this solid concrete wall that you just can't get through. And whatever you've designed that wall to be, whatever limitation really seems to stop you in your mind, that's the wall. And he says if you but touched it with the hand of faith, you would actually see that your hand can go through it. That's the image he gives. So don't walk by sight. Right? Don't live your life through the physical senses or the appearances. Walk by faith or this inner vision that sees through appearances. It's very important. So in this non-dual Shaiva Tantra that we were talking about, it gets into the fact that when we don't know this about ourselves, our deeper nature, and that we are the pattern of the pattern, that we are the son of the Father, we are the child of the Great Mother, whatever way you want to call this, but that we are the offspring of divinity, and that through our intentionality, we were given the gift of making our own reality in harmony with the great all and everything, or in miscreating. But nevertheless, we have the gift, as we've already said. But when we are not in alignment with our true self and we're operating as this limited me, the Shaiva Tantrics will say that this is when we have what's called the impurity of individuality. And the impurity of individuality, or anavamala, is when we start to really believe that we're the separate self and we act from it. And when we act from it, we create karma, which is the second impurity, karmamala. And when we create this impurity of action from this false self, we bind ourselves to our patterns of distortion. And then they get recorded and then sent into the subconscious mind. And like we said earlier, now they're giving us these volitional impulses to do it again. And we keep repeating these patterns and getting thrown back into these limiting dynamics and dysfunctional relationships because we're acting from the limiting belief of the ego self. And the third and final distortion that the tantrics will say goes on when you're bought into this false self is Maya. Maya, Mala. And the Maya is when we are looking at differences as if they were real. So that we start to judge from this false perspective of the solid individual. And we use our evaluations, our value system, our hierarchy of needs to assess and evaluate everyone. And we do it all in a flash. You know another factoid here that's fascinating? The human brain is processing 11 million bits of information every second, they've determined, again, neuroscience. 11 million bits of information every second. And what we are conscious of are 30 to 50 bits of that information. So think about how much is happening here, and we're oblivious, right? Don't they say we use about 10% of our brain, and there's 93% of junk DNA? Like they call it junk because they don't know what it does. All that really says is we have all of this untapped potential. So when we begin to actualize going from the mind of flesh to the mind of spirit, allowing grace to operate, going through this sanctification process, these hidden dimensions of ourself begin to turn on. You'll know it if you don't already, that there's a circuit board that's going to light you up from a dimension that is not physical in your experience. And you're going to have these abilities to understand and know intuitively in a flash. At the end of his life, Carl Jung called this synchronicity. And what he was getting at, he wrote a book with Wolfgang Pauli, one of the eminent quantum physicists of his day. And what they were getting at is, like David Bohm, we talked about last week with the holographic universe, there is an order or substratum of reality where everything is happening simultaneously. There's no time lag. And so what synchronicity is showing us is that there are these untapped potentials within our mind that we can actually experience when we go back into harmony with the greater pattern of who we are. Remove the veil. Open up. Realize that we are the universe, becoming conscious of itself. The metagalactic order and our neural net are one. And there's no two-ness. What are we waiting for? So meditation is incubation. Meditation is allowing this God consciousness to grow and get stronger, become increasingly purified, so that we go to the third stage of the Christian path. Eventually, we get to a place of glorification. Well, in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, they call theosis. Theosis in Greek literally means you become the divine nature. We are partakers of the divine nature. So we divinize the universe. We're no longer these separate little entities in these points of consciousness at that origin moment of creation, projecting chi or psychic energy from our own intention. No, no, no. That individual essence point of consciousness has merged with the ocean of its creator. So the Father and the Son become one. Shiva and Shakti become one. The Tao and the Da become one. And so now we are extending the divinized presence within the world. We light up the world. We are the light of the world. This is full actualization of your hidden potentiality. What else would you be but everything, and divine, and holy? But so is everything else, because you're going to see, as Jesus says in the Gospel of Thomas, the kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the whole earth, but people don't see it. Chop open a log, and I'm there. Lift up a stone, and behold, I'm there. We're everything's conscious, because everything is an outpicturing of our consciousness. And when we go into a state of glorification or theosis, we see God in everything, because God is in our mind. And there's nothing our holiness cannot do. This is our inheritance. This is our self. This is the good news, my friends. Not belonging to a club or an institution or a company that puts the fear of hell in you. No, waking up from that dream and being a child of God and turning the world upside down. That's your inheritance. So a little bit more about Jung's synchronicity. This is taken from Jung's Map of the Soul. We did a book study on this, so if you like it, you can listen to it on my website, studyoftheway.com. Okay? So this is one of the students, the direct students of Jung, Murray Stein, and he wrote this about Jung. Jung was fascinated with J.B. Rhine's experiments in extrasensory perception, or ESP, at Duke University. He was impressed because they demonstrated using probability theory that ESP cannot be explained causally, that is, within time and space, cause and effect, relationships. The experiment showed that humans can cross the seemingly absolute boundaries that limit us to a single time-space continuum. This reminded Jung of Einstein's theory of relativity and also of dreams he had observed, where distant events were imaged during or before they took place. Rhine's experiments offered new empirical evidence for what Jung had already concluded, namely that the psyche is not limited absolutely by the boundaries of time and space. Causality, which assumes an absolutely sealed time and space continuum, cannot explain these events. Jung indicates that no energy is transmitted in Rhine's ESP experiments. And what these experiments were showing was you had test subjects split apart in different rooms. And one subject was given a card to focus on, and the other test subject in the other room immediately said what was on the card. So a card is turned over in one room, an image appears in a person's psyche in another room. And these coincide more often than is statistically probable. Jung uses the term synchronicity in print for the first time in this essay. Quote, "It cannot be a question of cause and effect, but of a falling together in time, a kind of simultaneity. Because of this quality of simultaneity, I have picked the term synchronicity to designate a hypothetical factor equal in rank to causality as a principle of explanation." So there is something operating beyond time and space, but still accessible by the psyche. That means that the psyche has an aspect of itself that's not in time and space. The one listening right now is that aspect. And extrasensory perception just means that you've gone through a clearing of your old way of being and a relaxing out of the limitations of the ego self, and you've gone through some sanctification and actualization of these hidden potentialities. You're lighting up these extrasensory perceptions. In A Course in Miracles, in the Manual for Teachers, Jesus actually says this is going to happen. You're going to get psychic abilities that come back online. You're going to have powers over matter and energy, time and space. That's what miracles will often display. They will overrule time and space. This comes immediately back to the practice. When you go and look at yourself and say, do I self-limit even here? Am I discrediting the fact that this can happen through me? Because the ego is quick to be the authority again and keep us locked within these prescribed patterns of conditioning where we've been sealed off in our consciousness. This is not real. This is impossible. Do you remember hearing that at the beginning of The Matrix, the first movie? When Trinity's being chased by the police and she leaps from skyscraper to skyscraper. And the takeoff that she had was defying gravity. And the police just had to stop at the threshold of the building. And one cop just goes, that's impossible. It's impossible to you because you're existing within the parameters of your conditioning. You're still in the matrix. But for those who are waking up, who've accepted the descent of grace, which translates you out of the matrix of darkness into the boundless kingdom of the Son that he loves, this is not impossible. You can heal the sick. You can raise the dead, as he says in A Course in Miracles, because you made sickness and death yourself. These are your limitations, not mine. He says in the Principle of Miracles, don't put your limits on me. Let me operate with my limits, and I don't have any. So this is where we get back into ESP, in the dimension of synchronicity. Einstein, towards the end of his life, he was discovering this, and he wasn't liking it because he was still rooted in causality. And so he called this spooky action at a distance. This was how he explained it away. He didn't like it. Much like Freud didn't like Jung's delving into these deeper states of consciousness. And this is what later Erwin Schrödinger would term entanglement. Okay, so synchronicity, entanglement. Entanglement, according to Schrödinger's equations, is that you can have these quantum particles that are spinning, and if you change the spin of one particle, if it's entangled with another particle, it doesn't matter if that particle's 100 light years away. It will instantaneously change. And so there is a field of acausality or synchronicity, and this is where the origin moment is, my friends. This is where we are anchored as the points of consciousness in this limitless field of infinite potentiality where everything is joined. One intuitive leap that Jung makes, which is nevertheless based on a good deal of confirming evidence in his experience, is that the unconscious possesses what he calls a priori knowledge. Now, let's just get clear with the terms here. When we talked about all of this unknown potentiality, the junk DNA, the 90% of your brain that's not tapped, etc., that Jung would refer to as the unconscious. Right? We don't know about it. Right? We're processing 50 bits of information, and 11 million bits are being processed. Where are those other 10,970 bits being processed? In a deeper dimension of our own psyche. We're just not privy to it because we've walled ourselves off with these limiting beliefs. Until you make the unconscious conscious, you will suffer and call it fate. How could an event remote in space and time produce corresponding psychic image when the transmission of energy necessary for this is not even thinkable? He's talking about the ESP experiment. However incomprehensible it may appear, we are finally compelled to assume that there is in the unconscious something like an a priori or already existing knowledge, or an immediacy of events which lacks any causal basis. This would allow for the possibility that intuitively we can know things that we have no rational way of knowing. Deep intuition can provide knowledge that is indeed really true and not just speculation, guesswork, or fantasy. In other words, in the unconscious, we know many things that we do not know that we know. These could be called unthought thoughts. He says this in the workbook in A Course in Miracles. He says, your thoughts that you think are not your real thoughts. And they're actually covering up your real thoughts. So this is what Murray Stein is saying through Jung's work, that we have these unthought thoughts, this a priori knowledge, this intuitive knowing that already knows it's one with everything. It's Buddha knowledge, Buddha wisdom. Now watch your mind. Where is your mind right now? Are you saying yes to this possibility, or are you rejecting it? How are you rejecting it? Watch. Look. This is how we disqualify ourselves from the freedom and the joy that we deep down yearn for. This is your inheritance. It can't be forced upon you. It must be invited. It is this notion that takes Jung into the farthest reaches of his speculations about the unity of psyche and world. If we know things that are beyond our conscious possibility of knowing, there is also an unknown knower in us. An aspect of the psyche that transcends the categories of time and space and is simultaneously present here and there, now and then. This would be called the self. Closer to you than your own breath, nearer than hands and feet. The unknown knower in you is you. This is why we meditate. To relax and let everything that is not us melt away, dissolve. And on that note, briefly here. So this is how, and keep in mind, when we use the word tantra, the word picture of tantra, and it's a Sanskrit word, but it means the warp and woof of a loom, the way threads are woven together. And what tantra also means in a more abstract way is continuity. And what they're getting at is what we've been talking about. As above, so below. As within, so without. It's all one weave. There's no place where I stop and you start. There's no place where I stop and the universe begins. It's one weave. We saw last week in Taoism, they call it the generative tissue of the universe. And what the Taoists say is we project through chi weave mind. Chi weave mind. In other words, we add our colors and our threads and our intentional expressions into the warp and the woof of creation. We co-create the pattern or miscreate it. So in this non-dual tantra teaching, the practice of meditation is primarily destructive in nature. That is, it allows you to strip away all your false, limited notions about what you are, revealing your true nature, the core of being that is all you have ever been. Then you'll have this a priori knowledge return to you. Of course, I've always been one with everything. I am everything. This is myself. The unknown knower is now known because the false knower has been dissolved. One of the great luminaries of non-dual Shaiva Tantra, Abhinavagupta, teaches, if the false mental constructs about ourselves are destabilized, then dissolved, the great heart will stand revealed in its fullness. So what did we talk about before? This destabilization and dissolution is the apocalypse. You're going to go through the apocalypse. But be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. And so I anchor for you. I anchor in you. And I'll be your sanctuary. Come to me, all those who are burdened and heavy laden. I will give you rest. If you believe in God, believe also in me. That's where you go. And then you watch your world come down. And it's going to come down. But you'll be fine. Trust me. So this dissolution, destabilization reveals the great heart that you are. And it stands in its fullness. Since you are already that, nothing need be added to make you perfect. Though it is also the case that most of us will need to strengthen our capacities through exercising them if we wish to maintain our connection to our innate perfection. Right? That's, in other words, we have to be committed. This is why we have a mind training on Monday nights. You come to class. You study your practices and your teachings every day because you're creating the vessel that's pure and able to hold the presence. If you're here today and gone tomorrow with ego concerns, you have a leaky vessel. You know, the Tibetans have that illustration in the preliminary teachings. The vessel is your consciousness, and some vessels are upside down, so that the teaching comes pouring out and there's nothing being received, because the mouth of the vessel is actually turned upside down, is on the ground. Another is a broken vessel. The teaching goes in and it goes out, goes in and goes out. Never remember what was that John said last week or what I read this morning in my spiritual teachings. And then the third way that the vessel is shown in these preliminary teachings is that it's laced with poison. It has impurities in it. And so when the pure Dharma teaching and the pure sacred teaching goes in, it gets mixed with the poisonous beliefs that you haven't been able to discern and let go of. And so then we get really sent off on maybe spiritual materialism or spiritual narcissism or false beliefs that keep the solid me in place, right? Or it's my group versus the other group. A little bit more here. So nothing need be added when you come to dissolve all that's in the way, right? This is when the great heart is revealed, you remove the blocks to the awareness of love's presence. The process of uncovering the core of reality of your being is very different from the kind of therapy aimed at making you feel better. For some, it can be very difficult, even searingly painful, to surrender the self-images in which so much energy has been invested. But it will inevitably result in a far vaster joy. The central tool in this process of dissolution, which is simultaneously the process of self-revelation, is the practice of discernment. For it is what allows us to distinguish between reality and mental constructs that we project onto reality. Okay? So then finally here, one can compare this unconscious knower in us to the capital E, I of God, a notion that nuns formerly used to scare school children in their attempt to induce strict obedience to the church's teaching. It is not only what you do, but even what you think. In fact, the eye of God is what you are, that God sees and keeps a running account of. This is a projective version of the same idea, that some kind of absolute knowledge exists within the unconscious. And finally here, the human psyche and our personal psychology participate in the order of this universe most profoundly through this unconscious. And through the process of what Stein is using Jung's term psychization. Psychization is making the unconscious conscious. In other words, melting the veils, removing the blocks, so your true self can begin to manifest in your awareness. That's psychization. Through this process, patterns of order in the universe become available to consciousness and eventually can be understood and integrated. Each person can witness the Creator and creative works from within by paying attention to image and synchronicity. In other words, there's going to be the world showing you this narrative. The Sufis say there are 3 great books that are giving you God's word. One book is the sacred text, whatever that is for the Sufi, the Quran, the Bible, whatever, a sacred book that you read. The second is within your heart. So God writes the sacred word within your own heart. And the third is the universe. The universe will show you in form, in images and synchronicities, God's word manifesting in your life. Learn how to read the signs and the symbols. This is part of the training. You'll see the effects of the Holy Spirit showing up as your relationships, as everything. He uses everything. And finally, for the archetype is not only the pattern of the psyche, but it also reflects the actual basic structure of the universe. As above, so below, spake the ancient sages. As within, so without, responds the modern soul explorer, Carl Gustav Jung. Let's digest. as you bring your hands to heart, if you want to join along, we're going to intone the sacred syllable Om, which the great mystics have said is the sound or vibration of the substratum of infinite potentiality. So collective exhale, collective inhale. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. Namaste, my friends. Blue bag's going to go around. If you're joining on YouTube or Facebook, we could not get the link up. Let's see if I could try again. Somehow it's not working. So if you are hearing me, if you're on YouTube or Facebook, you can go to the Unity website, unityofstewart.org, I think it is. You can Google it and donate to the 5 p.m. service. Thank you very much. And we bless the offering with the intention that whatever form it takes, it becomes a reflection and a reminder of our oneness with the Creator and the source of all love. And so it is. Amen. Thank you. All right. You made it. And again, we clear our minds and allow this origin moment to be this instant where we are one with one another in this state of pure awareness. Where the light of God surrounds us, the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, and the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. Amen. Right? Is. Good night. Love you guys. Thank you so much.